Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us back around the bonfire. This is John, normal hot takes host, filling in for Matt this week as he is off, lost in the woods somewhere. Super excited to have the rest of the gang back, though. As always, we are joined by the fellas, Tim Hotsy. Tim, I always feel like I'm saying your name wrong, but how are you doing, brother?
You got it right. Just imagine another E on the end and don't add in an unnecessary L, which a lot of people seem to want to do.
Love it. DJ joining us, statistician, historian, all the fun stuff. How are you feeling?
I have trees, Ross. I'm good.
And of course, the pole with the gold, the man with the saxophone, Alan joining as well. Alan, how are we feeling, sir?
DePaul basketball win, Bulls win, Fire win. Honestly, it's great. I just now notice you have a DePaul shirt on. Like, how this is awesome. Honestly,
yeah.
So it's a good time all around. What's not good is that I just now paid off that speeding ticket from the Columbus game, and oh boy, costs about the same as much as a hockey sweater. So that's the only, I guess, bad thing.
Yeah, man. Ohio is the state that always takes and never gives. Terrible place to be, but the best place to be is around the bonfire with the fellas. Thanks again for joining us, guys. Coming off certainly the best game of the year so far. Certainly the most fun I've had watching Chicago Fire football in almost a year at this point, since Montreal last year. Coming fresh off a 3-1 victory over FC Dallas. But we do have some news we're going to run around here. First and foremost, we had some reporting from the ribbon cutting ceremony for the new Endeavor Health Training Center. You have really exciting stuff there. Tim, you want to kind of talk us through what that opening ceremony was like?
Sure. So the team has been training at the center since late January, and we've been allowed as media to kind of get in just to see, like, literally we're there for seeing a few minutes of training, the lobby, and then there's a media room that's kind of like off the lobby, and that's it. We haven't gotten a chance to see the rest of it until Monday. We got a complete tour, and they had like a ceremony where they had Joe Mansueto, Dave Baldwin, Caddy, Paul Cabell from the Fire, who's been there since and really spearheading the project, as well as the one of the representatives from the LAC for the Avila homes on whose land, the demolished buildings that were demolished 25 years ago. The training center was built. And it was a cool event. I mean, I encourage everyone to check out the photo tour that we put up. Especially, it kind of goes through not just what it looks like, but we also had Caddy kind of like walk us through the entire rationale for why it was built the way it was built. And it just seems like an incredibly impressive facility, and it's even more impressive, I think, once you get to see the thought that went into every decision as part of it.
Yeah, I mean, space looks beautiful. I know we had some comments from Greg Berhalter saying it's one of the best facilities he's ever been in. So it certainly seems to be world class. A little bit of buzz around, frankly, just the investment of it. I know there was some talk as well from surrounding kind of the Chicago Housing Authority aspect of it. Some talk of some. I know you had the chance to speak with some folks around there. If you could give us a little bit more info on that.
Yeah, so there were some protesters that were there for a few minutes. To be honest, I hardly noticed them. I just at first was like, why are those people milling around over there? That's kind of weird. As the event was starting, they were asked to leave, which is sort of normal for a private event and private property, I guess. The land is still owned by the CHA, but it's leased for the next few decades by the Fire. But from talking both to people in the housing projects is part of the previous work that I've done around this, as well as several team sources and sources outside of the team. They did a lot of work to reach out to the community and say, like, what would it take for us to be a good neighbor, for you to want us here and not just accept us? And they pushed really hard to get things, including a guarantee that the remaining residents in the homes that were not demolished in like the early 2000s would have the gut renovations that they were promised literally 25, 26 years ago finally happen. And that is built into the lease with the Fire. So in theory, the Fire could go after the CHA for breach of contract if it doesn't happen as negotiated in the lease. And that was the resident said that's a deal breaker if we don't have that, because that is something that we've been promised and we've never received. And the CHA said, well, that's not the kind of thing we can put into a lease. And the Fire said, put it in or we walk. And eventually, I believe that Mayor Lightfoot at the time was involved in kind of like mediating and said, no, like, get this into the lease. So it really was, I think they tried to reach out. There was a Trib article where they had, some different groups that they say weren't consulted, and they, the groups seem to indicate that they, felt like the training center was not a welcome use of the land. I was told by several team sources that they tried meeting with, like, there was a church. They tried meeting with leaders and, the church group itself. They were more than happy to go to the church and talk things through, talk the plans through, and they never heard back. So, it's difficult, I think, to be a stakeholder in something and to express your opinion if the other side, or like hear someone's opinion if they don't want to talk to you. So, it's Chicago. Like, nothing is going to be built 1,000% without controversy, but it's a lease that I think gives real money to the CHA, and it doesn't seem like one of those cases where the public or the taxpayers getting screwed with the amount of money that the Fire are paying. So I think that's kind of good to see. Joe Mansueto called it a civic project, explicitly, not just this project, this part of the project, but also his ownership at the Fire as being a civic project for trying to build the community of Chicago and the game in Chicago.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a city full of empty lots, it is one less empty lot. So candidly, I'll take that.
Yeah, no. I mean, first of all, the fact that we have a beautiful facility in Chicago rather than, as we call it, Mount Bridgeview out in Bridgeview, it just puts the club on another level towards us being looking a bit more professional. I've mentioned it several times on other podcasts. It will help with bringing players in. It will help, of course, with actual training. And it will just look nicer than imagine just going over that viaduct and you see the Holiday Inn and SeatGeek and the Dome or whatever. Like, this is just a lot nicer.
Well, plus the academy, right? Like, academy players, like, they had to get to Bridgeview, and like, for a lot of people, that is not a convenient place to get to any time of day or night, just with traffic and everything else. And now it's in the heart of the city. Like, you can get there via CTA. It's not that far off of several L lines. It is off of major bus routes. It is like close to the highway for families that can drive their academy kids in or out. Like, and it's just like a much nicer facility. They also have things like academy locker rooms and showers now. So it's not just like they're at training, and if their mom or dad can't pick them up directly after training, they're just like standing out in the rain or whatever. It's an entirely different world. And the Fire, I think, are really committed to being an academy forward team, like a team that is building through the academy first and foremost.
Another empty lot, as you mentioned. And now the next thing to do is take that 78 lot in the South Loop for a new stadium, honestly. Get on that, Joe.
That was, so, Paul Tenorio was there. He, from The Athletic, and he, obviously used to be a Fire beat reporter, so he knows a lot of people around the team pretty well. And, he, we were asking basically, like, where's the Fire's memorabilia and like history going to be? Because there was some of that at Bridgeview. It's not on display now at Soldier Field, obviously. Was some of it going to be at the training center because they hadn't finished decorating and stuff yet? It's like, some of it, but some of it we're saving maybe for another project down the line. And Paul was like, you mean like a trophy room in the South Loop? And Caddy was like, yeah, we're just going to build a trophy room in the South Loop. That's it. With like a twinkle in his eye. So nothing official. I was kind of expecting an official update of something, or Joe Mansueto to say something about the project, because he did last time we spoke to him. And it was just a bomb. We were like shocked at the Berhalter introduction that he was talking about a stadium. Nothing came of that in this one, unfortunately. But yeah, Caddy's saying that. I mean, talking to team sources, it's something that everyone just believes is going to happen. And I think that there's a path forward. They're just trying to not jump the gun and say things are official too quickly before they've got their ducks in a row.
Amen.
Yeah. And I even say, like, as early as the home opener last year, we had, having a conversation with Dave Baldwin, and he doesn't say if we ever get our own stadium. He says when we have our own stadium. So clearly very singular focus that it's happening. Kind of keeping things moving. Couple other quick hitters we've got. Brian Dowd, Notre Dame goalkeeper, drafted in the Super Draft of 2023, 2024, last year's Super Draft. Can't get my years straight. loaned out to FC Tulsa on a season-long loan, so likely not going to be back this season. And then Chicago Fire 2 opened their season this afternoon as a 4-1 loss to Huntsville. Former Fire 2 player Christian Kofi scoring twice, and Justin Reynolds added an own goal. So even if we, yeah, gosh, just feels like Chicago Fire 2 players are scoring everything over there for him. So not a great start.
Add Trep Fleming's goal to that. And it's the Fire, like former or current Fire 2 players are responsible for 4 of the 5 goals that happened in that match. So,
Says a lot about the scouting department. We'll say that much, in one way or another. And then before we keep moving, also a quick shout out if you haven't seen it yet. Really fun tailgate video from Joe and Matt that went out on the YouTube channel this week, talking to a bunch of fans. Seemed like Joe went out of his way to get everybody to call me an idiot, but that's fine. It's a lot of fun. Go check it out over on the Men in Red 97 YouTube account. And kind of lastly, a whole bunch of roster up and down. Obviously, we're still dealing with the fallout of what seems to be a disastrous injury bug that has bit the Fire. And then on top of that, we had the news come out this week that the Fire, as of now, only have about $500,000 in GAM remaining, and that's if I round up. So, Tim, I'll kind of kick to you a little bit on what that dollar amount means. Obviously, team is in desperate need of players and doesn't necessarily have the resources to bring them in, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, they do. And Greg Berhalter has talked about adding 1, potentially 2 players to the roster before this window closes, and that's April 23rd. So, still some time for that to happen. Obviously, players can also be moved out via a trade, a sale. That would have to be a cash transfer basically in MLS or to USL because the window's closed pretty much everywhere else. Or if some player is given the official season-ending injury tag, that would free up the players like cap and roster space for the Fire. They could sign someone with that available space. But so adding 1 or 2 players up, potentially in this window, and then going to a third designated player model in the summer is the current plan. They have the cap space to do that. I lay this out in a piece on Men in Red 97, but there's a lot that we know about the GAM release. There's a lot that we don't know about a team's cap position overall, despite the GAM release, including how much TAM a team has, which is not public information, as well as kind of like some of the other cap mechanisms and stuff like that. Our reporting on Men in Red 97, I think, has done a good job of laying out the Fire's position, and we have sources that we've been able to communicate with to get a strong idea of a lot of it. But other teams, the reporting isn't as strong there. So one thing that is unique, the Fire decided to take 1 million of the 2 million in GAM they're eligible to receive, going 2-4-2. If they stay 2-4-2 for the entire season, they will take the second $1 million in the summer. But that's not currently the plan. Some other teams, there are GAM figures that came out that were a 2-4-2 team. It may have been the whole 2 million. It may have been less. It may have been less than $1 million. It's very weird, and it's weird that wasn't communicated at all. And it has to be a team by team decision, which just, again, makes the numbers confusing. So you can't really compare the Fire to other teams. But there is some cap flexibility. There's not enough, I don't think, to like sign 2 mid to high end players. So we're not going to get 2 guys of like Kwame's caliber added to the roster this window, unless there's like a major departure that would open up that space.
Which that departure more than likely would end up being Chris Mueller.
And even that may not be enough space. And then the issue with that is if Chris Mueller, who hasn't been playing, but he's been away for family reasons after he and his wife had a child, their second. He has an expensive contract. There's no one that is banging down the Fire's door to take that contract off of them with him in the last year of his deal. So to move him on, it looks like for the most part, the Fire would probably need to offer to retain some of that cap hit. So he's on, a little bit over $700K a year. I don't know, I could just make up numbers, but if the Fire said, okay, if we kept $300,000 of the cap hit, and then the other team would be responsible for 400,000 of it if it was an exact 700, which it's not. But that would mean the Fire would only free up $400,000 in cap space in moving Mueller. And so that limits the flexibility even more. If a player was actually traded away, And again, it's not a super deep roster and there's not a lot of healthy bodies to trade away that the Fire don't need. That would open that entire space.
And so as we kind of go in there a little bit, how does that kind of open the frame for a guy like Sam Williams, who we'll talk a little bit later about kind of him coming on, right, in the last, 7 minutes of that game. But how does that open a spot for a guy like Sam Williams, who's now out of call-ups for the year in the first 3 matches? We're incredibly thin at midfield with now Kellen Acosta going down. Do we see maybe a path for somebody like him or Harold Osorio or anybody else coming up from Fire 2?
So there's a couple pieces of that. I'm glad you brought it up that way. So for starters, we don't, as of when we're recording, really know what the situation is with Acosta. I think a lot of us are making an assumption. I said in my match recap that Fire fans probably felt very familiar looking at that compared to what we saw from Gutman in the first game of the year last year. But we don't know if it's the same injury, and we don't know how long it will be, and we don't know what the outcome of that will be. So I think that a lot of people are just pulling for Acosta to be okay for him, as well as I think for the Fire's roster. The other thing is, if a team has under 18 outfield players available, they can go. They're in what's called an extreme hardship situation, meaning that the two MLS match cap for short-term agreements wouldn't apply, and the Fire could bring up Fire 2 players for more than that. I don't remember the specific maximum number of matches that are available, but I think it's as long as they're in that situation, they can continue to do that. I don't know if that helps, clear up what the possibilities would be from Fire 2.
One thing to note with Acosta, he did post on Instagram. He was taking photos with fans after the game. So, and he didn't look like he had any injury to his leg. He didn't have a boot on or anything. So, hopefully that's a good sign. I hope. But
yeah, I think and I'm not trying to speculate here, but I think that the assumption, they said this on the broadcast, so it's not like I'm the first person doing it, but I think that the fear was that it's a hamstring injury, which can be very difficult to diagnose and hard and slow to heal. And if you've never had a hamstring injury, congratulations, you are lucky. If you have, the difficulty is you may be even able to place weight on it in a certain position, like standing, and you may even be able to walk on it, but doing things like extending your leg like you'd have to do to run, or putting too much weight on it, or pivoting, like even moving slightly off of certain postures, can be incredibly painful, and you just don't have any muscular strength there because of the tear. So you're not able to put really the strength you need to bear on it to do things like run or play soccer or that kind of stuff.
Yes.
And I think the other side of the coin there too, right, is also you need to kind of consider it in the perspective of we've already been thin. Even if he comes back next week, you don't feel great about the guy who is supposed to be your 90 minutes week in, week out captain, central midfielder with a soft tissue injury in March. Does not bode well for the rest of his year. I'll say that.
Yeah. And credit to Maury Pineda for coming on and playing as many minutes as he did. The man can barely walk, or he could barely walk when I saw him, earlier this week. So it's not a great situation to be in. And, he didn't have a great game on the pitch, but he certainly had a much better game than I think anyone could have really expected given that injury situation. So it's rough. It's rough. We'll talk about the game in a second, but any way you do it, like I asked Berhalter how concerned he was, especially with midfield depth. And he said on a scale from 1 to, this isn't the exact quote, but he did this. The last part of this is 100% the quote. On a scale from 1 to 10, he's at about a 9.5.
Yeah, I think it was Alex who had spoken with him. Am I making that up? And I think that was literal. Like I don't want to say that was definitely the quote, but I know that was
that was definitely the quote. I asked him that,
yeah.
And then Alex had a follow up asking about bringing someone in this upcoming week, and Berhalter basically said they're working on additional signings, but they don't think it's going to happen this week. Which, again, there's like short term and long term. Short term, obviously, like everyone's worried about what happens the next match because it's every game does matter, especially when you're trying to get points and develop an identity. But the advantage is if you're saying it's not going to be next week, that makes me think that the players that he's talking about are not players that are currently in MLS. So it could be a bigger, more impactful signing than I think saying, hey, can we get the fourth guy on your depth chart for, some amount of GAM and take him off your hands or, intra MLS loans are allowed. They're just not common. Could we have this guy for the season or have this guy until June? It's so in a way that's good if they're, Berhalter is swinging big. In a way it's, difficult if the team has like 14 healthy guys on Saturday,
Yeah. I mean, we're a little doom and gloom. Let's take this from 5 big dooms to 5 big booms. We're sounding very sad for a team that had an incredible 3-1 comeback victory last night. Just some quick hitters, right? Brian Gutierrez looked incredible. Leo Barroso coming off the bench towards the end of that game made the difference, kind of put in the game winner and looked fantastic for all 15 minutes he was actually out there. One thing I was curious about, and I want to pose this question to the group because it's something consistent we've seen with a depleted bench, is the way Greg was kind of deploying his subs. And you brought up an interesting point, Tim, which was when Maury Pineda came on in the 30th minute, I said, okay, cool. We're not seeing Sam Williams today. We're not going to burn his last sub. Like, that's what that meant to me. To see him come on in the 83rd minute, that was surprising to me, right? We're wasting his last call up for 15 minutes. Obviously, it was a game we were trying to win, but I'm kind of curious to see your guys' thoughts on where that sub fit in Greg's overall usage of this depleted roster, even though it all worked out for the best yesterday.
I think Sam Williams' sub can basically be described as a Austin, you're gonna need to believe this, but a oh shit moment where it's like Orhel goes down with an injury. He had been holding his elbow earlier, and that's the only reason why I think Williams came on. If Orhel doesn't get injured, Williams doesn't see the field at all. But at the same time, he could have brought on like Omar Gonzalez,
and push Jack Elliott up a little bit into the role for a few minutes when you're trying to see it again. Yeah, I agree. It's sort of interesting because it's the second time in a row that we've seen a short-term agreement, call up be used very, very late in the game when there's, like last time the Fire had a 1-goal lead when they used Harold Osorio's first call up, which gave him his first MLS minutes, which was cool and all. But I mean, is like deep into stoppage time when you're trying to protect a 1-goal lead, the time you want to give a guy his first ever MLS minutes. And, obviously the conceding goal happened. That wasn't Harold Osorio's fault directly, but, I thought it was an interesting use of a very limited resource when the Fire looked like they're going to be needing to tap that resource.
Yeah. And then kind of keeping it moving. I mean, really, really fantastic stuff from Brian Gutierrez. I think, for me at least, personal bright spot of the game. I think on a field with Peter Musa and Lucio Acosta, he was maybe the best player, maybe the most impactful. Played all 90 minutes. Kind of general round table. What stood out to you guys in terms of what stood out to you, best player on the pitch?
Brady. Like literally Brady. Just so far this season, Brady. Alex tweeted this out that Brady has been one of, if not the best goalkeepers in MLS, and yeah, right now he looks like somebody that's trying to either convince Pochettino that, hey, I should be called up, or Scotland's going to call me up. That's basically the best way to describe Brady right now.
And I don't think it's just about the call-ups. I mean, to be honest, he was statistically one of the best goalkeepers for most of his first season as a starter in MLS in 2023. Last year, he regressed statistically, and I've talked about this, but I think that's because of the way that stats work with goalies. I think Brady, because of the system around him, was never where he wanted to be stopping shots. I think that he had to cover too many angles, and I think that he had to just was never in a place where he could get where he needed to be comfortable. But yeah, I think that Brady had a fantastic game. I think for outfield players, I think Andrew Grootman really, really did a phenomenal job. Getting the first goal, which was just like, it's the kind of goal that I think only gets scored if Gutman is feeling the game, because it wasn't like a finesse touch. It wasn't a shot from distance that was like a cannon that blasted in. He had the confidence to get in and get his body into the right place on a cross, and he connected with it. And it wasn't, I think, incredibly difficult at that point. But the fact that he was there, I think, says a lot about where his head is.
I also feel like it needs to be pointed out, the assist for that was a cross from Hugo Kuipers.
Hugo Kuipers was doing a really phenomenal job playing basically as a winger for throughout the match. And I thought that was an interesting, because, it's kind of weird. Some of the voices around MLS when he was signed last year, people made it sound like Kuipers was a target center forward, like a guy that you like lob the ball into and he'll connect, and like that was it. My notes last year didn't have a lot of that, probably because he just didn't get a lot of that service in the box. But it was like a lot of like very good at hold up play. He is making runs that are opening space for someone else, and now we're seeing him basically function as a winger, especially like after Barlow came on and the Fire were playing a 2-striker system. So it was, I think, a very, very complete game from Kuipers. And I think that having Bamba on the field also really helped with that too.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say, shout out Andrew Gutman. He definitely put in the workload. And I think I said this about the game against DC, but Bamba, Kuipers, just that front line, including the left right backs, especially Gutman. It's and honestly, Omari Glasgow, I want to add that name in there as well. Just the fast players. Because I think the one thing that I would say that still sort of frustrates me is how, the playing from the back and taking it fairly slowly sometimes is just a bit too on edge, bit too nervy. Probably because the first game of the season, we shot ourselves 3 times in the foot playing like that. So it just makes me unnervy, period. But with those fast type players, and the players that I'm basically seeing the most doing that are Gutman or Bamba, Kuipers, just it's a chef's kiss in my opinion.
Yeah, I thought. I mean, it was Omari Glasgow's first thought. I thought he struggled a lot throughout the match. If I'm being honest, he did have. I don't think you blame him for this. Like he did have a very good look on goal with a shot that just went off with way too much power, off in the wrong direction from the net. But I care more about the fact that he was able to get into that spot and get to that cross than if he does that 10 more times, he will have several goals out of it. I'm not worried. I just wanted to keep on doing that. But I thought it was a difficult situation for him to be in. I know I'm writing this hype train pretty hard, but it's because I believe in it. I really think Sergio Orhel has, shown tremendous game-on-game growth. I thought against Columbus, he struggled defensively, and that led to at least one of the goals. And I think that some of the others were because the defensive shape wasn't really maintained that well throughout the match. I thought against DC, he did better. He struggled a little bit physically, but like DC has a very big physical team that'll try to beat you up. And he's gotten bigger, but he's not big. And he struggled a little bit, and he didn't give much forward. Greg Berhalter said that he challenged Sergio Orhel to be better defensively after game 1, and he was better after game 2, where he didn't give a lot going forward, to use more of his creativity and ball playing ability in the next game. And we saw that in Dallas. I mean, he did. So he's like finally kind of put those pieces together and had a complete game. There's going to be ups and downs, and but he has gone from being a guy that like I think you're nervous about seeing him in the starting 11 of like, what are we going to get with this? Is this going to be a nightmare? To now, I think it's okay if Kellen DaCosta isn't available for some period of time, if he's not available next week, you feel okay about Orhel, and I think you kind of wonder, you worry more about like who's going to be next to him, but I don't think you're that worried about Orhel. Now, I mean, obviously he had the benefit of having a guy with Acosta's ability and experience playing next to him for the first half hour of this game, as well as the other 2 games. But, he did have 60 minutes without him with, Maury Pineda, who I already, we talked about how he's not close to being fully fit. And he still had a better game than we've seen from him previously, which I think says a lot.
Yeah, kind of an interesting juxtaposition between Glasgow and Orhel. I think, Tim, I tend to agree with you. The first note I have written from last night was Omari was getting picked on the whole night. He was getting bullied on the ball. Like, he doesn't look physically there yet, right? He's got the speed, he's got the pace. I don't know that he has for lack of a better word, like the man strength to hang in MLS yet. And that's not a negative thing about him. I think he's got the potential. He might just need a little more time. And it seems like Orhel has kind of stepped into that with a little bit more of that aspect in his game.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the I think that's why he was playing in MLS Next Pro, and that's why he was signed in MLS Next Pro and not elsewhere. It's a little difficult because he does have finesse. He does have a lot of speed, but he's not a very big guy. He's 21 years old now, so he's, do you guys grow from, 21, 22? Sometimes is he going to gain a foot? Like, that would be unlikely. And I think that's one of the challenges with him is like, we saw that he was more than the skill level necessary for next pro, which is a league that has a lot of teenagers in it. And he could hang with that physicality, but does he have the skill level to be good enough to be in MLS to the point where not having that physical aspect of his game isn't too much of a hindrance? I think that's going to be the challenge. And I think it's also why he wouldn't be a good fit. Like a lot of his, teammates on the Guyanese national team are playing in like lower leagues in England and stuff like that. And I mean, I feel like the poor man would last like 75 seconds in League One in England. Like he would just be a flattened stain on the pitch very quickly. And there's no VAR there, so nobody would, know anything about it after that.
Yeah, and I would also, kind of another new face in the lineup, but I would kind of contrast that to Leo Barroso, who walks into the game, is physically smaller, slighter than a guy like Omari, and he's holding his own on the ball. Like there was more than one time he was down there against, and for the life of me, I can't remember the left center back from Dallas's name, like banging a little bit. You know what I mean? Throwing shoulders and standing firm. I super impressed by the way he looked. The comp I heard when we signed him was maybe like a more technical, a more talented DeAndre Yedlin. And I almost think that based on 15 minutes, that might have undersold it a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. It was great seeing a U22 signing because, I think we all have mixed feelings about the U22 program. It has ended up not yielding a lot of very notable failures, and John Duran making an absolute boatload of money for the Fire, amongst some other successes, right? But I mean, on a whole, throughout the league, you look at like a lot of these guys, year 2 or year 3 in the league that come on big 7-figure transfer fees end up being bench options and not necessarily playing that much even off of that. But yeah, I think you're talking about Marco Farfan, who I think is a quality MLS player that has been around the league for a few years. He's in his mid-20s, like he's bigger, more physical, and just Barroso just tore through him like sheets of tissue. And it was good to see, like at long last, one of the Fire's 2 like big name, not that it's a name that we knew necessarily, but like coming from Sporting CB's academy, right? Like big signings of the offseason finally on the pitch and make an impact almost instantly, just like we saw with Jonathan Bamba.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Super impressive. Kind of shifting, staying on the right side of that defensive line. I think one thing I noticed throughout the game and would love to hear a little bit back from you guys. Obviously playing out of the back, there's a lot of interchange in that back line. Seemed pretty consistently Sam Rogers was the guy without somebody to dance with, right? Seemed like every opportunity he got, Jack Elliott was pushing into the midfield, pushing out to Gutman. I even saw him play some wide balls out to Dean on occasion, right? A little bit concerning there. Was surprised we didn't see Omar Gonzalez, who, as far as I'm aware, is fully fit. It was surprising to see him go all 90 again.
Yeah, I agree with that. I thought it was going to be Omar Gonzalez's start. Obviously he's a Dallas native. He played last year in Dallas, so like he knows like guys. Obviously Lucho Acosta wasn't there last year, but he played every day in training. Like he knows Peter Musa, like he knows a lot of the squad that still remains. And I just thought that would be a good opportunity for him to use that knowledge in front of like probably some family members and stuff that may have come to visit. So I thought there was an interesting choice. I thought that Rogers did. Okay, I always get the Sams mixed up, and it's like so many first name. Like you've got 2 first names, both of you. Come on. But yeah, I thought that Rogers did struggle a little bit. He seemed to do a decent job connecting with Sergio Orahel at times. I don't know that it was always fantastic, and it seems like he's having some issues kind of adapting to MLS, if we're being 100% honest about it.
Yeah, I mean, with the injury crisis that we're going through, I feel like, and since it's still the beginning of the season, we could have seen a bit more of, I guess, like playing around or like experimentation with that back line and giving Gonzalez that chance to maybe prove himself, especially against Dallas where he previously played, because who doesn't love a revenge tour? So
100%. Yep.
Yeah, so I agree with Tim. I think Greg could have given Gonzalez a chance, but who knows? Maybe it'll happen in the next 2 games on the road.
I guess, and I agree with you there. I think that the other side of it, just talking to Jack Elliott, he said that one thing that was kind of an adaptation for him, because this is his second professional club, right, after spending the rest of his career in Philadelphia, is just that it can take time for the defensive line to be able to have that instinctive kind of communication with each other and really jive together. And he's, like mistakes happen when that happens wrong. And so, I don't know if like rotating partners as center backs every week is necessarily great. Talking to Berhalter before the game, I asked about Rodgers, and he said that like they've had conversations about some of the difficulties that we've seen in his game, and said he's working at it, which is good, but that also means like the way that Berhalter said it was like he's working at it, but he's not there yet.
Yeah.
Probably doesn't help any when your first 2 starts are against Christian Benteke and then Lucho Acosta and Peter Musa. So probably does not make his life any easier than it could have been.
True.
Yeah, especially because like he hadn't regularly been a starting player bouncing around in Northern Europe in previous seasons. And so, I think that it's one of those things where maybe just getting used to the stability of the situation and stuff could give him opportunity to grow. Early in training, I think he looked really ready to go. I think that he looked, I saw better ball playing ability from him than I thought in the training sessions that I saw. Like he's got talent there. I just, it's about getting it all together, and especially getting the defensive part of the game 100% locked in, because we've seen the Fire give up some goals that I think defensive spacing and stability have been an issue, like along with the midfield too. And, personnel challenges definitely a factor there. But, I still think that like right now that is a weak point. And I think he was one of the weakest players on the Fire roster in a game that I think overall looked pretty good for a lot of people on the roster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely a surprisingly strong performance. I went into this game with an expectation, candidly, of a loss. I thought going down there would not be the outcome it was. Team looked impressive. The scheme, the plan, the system really seems to be coming together for Greg. Part of that, a little bit of commitment to the starters, right? We're seeing Sergio Orihel in there every week. We're seeing Jonathan Bamba and Hugo Kuipers get comfortable together. You guys kind of hit on really how impressive Hugo was a little bit earlier. In my opinion, maybe the best single game we've seen from him, even better than against DC where he scored 2 goals, just because he was so much more dynamic in this game, right? I kind of want to, we've been talking about the back line, would love to dive into the attack kind of in that respect as well. We've talked about Hugo, but like I mentioned before, I think in terms of outfield players, the guy that stood out to me last night was Brian Gutierrez. You saw how good this team looked. I'll kind of give my piece, and then I'll let you guys kind of fill it in. But I've said before, like, I don't find him to be a tremendously creative player, in that I don't think he's the guy, if he's got 6 guys right in front of him, that will break through that line and take the shot. But he has this incredible vision of the game, right? In that he seems to know exactly where the pass needs to go and when to make it to hit somebody in stride. And we saw him break out Bamba a few times. We saw him break out Gutman and just play some really nice balls on the interior. Would love to hear, if you guys have any thoughts on his game, but also generally speaking on the attack outside of Kuipers, who we already talked about, kind of thoughts on the way the rest of the interchange looked. Even on the right side with Glasgow, who we spoke about a little bit.
My biggest thing is the fact that the attack was not shut down, both mentally and physically, considering the fact that they scored 10 goals. They scored 3 goals in 10 minutes, like from the 80th minute. If you think about Fire teams from the past few years, they go a goal down, especially if it's in the second half, they're shut down, or it's like really difficult for them to claw back, even like a draw or something. But this time, this was the team that was like, we're not going to take it. No, we're not going to take it anymore. And just kept pushing forward. And like you mentioned, in stride, just constantly pushing forward, especially to create those last 3 goals, which was essentially, in my opinion, the kinds where it was like, let's just do it, F it, and it made it.
I think the other thing is like the Fire really grew into this game in terms of the offense, right? Because I think that looking at Dallas's roster, like we talked about the guys that they've got on the attack, their defense I think was permeable, right? So I was thinking that it would be sort of an opportunity for an improvement on what we saw in Columbus, where the Fire went out to a strong start. They got a couple goals fairly early, ended up like conceding those leads and then eventually going down and they didn't recover. So, the weather was a factor. It was raining and it seemed like it was raining increasingly heavily throughout the course of the over the course of the match. But the first half was not good on the attack from the Fire. I think that there's only one shot that I can remember that I've got in my notes. It looked like a strong shot. I think in the second minute, very early on from Brian Gutierrez. It did not make it anywhere close to being on target. And I believe that was the only shot that the team had that entire first half. So the offense really wasn't clicking. It seemed like Dallas were kind of controlling the state of play. They were making some mistakes and Brady was just making some amazing saves. But then they kind of grew into the game. And what was remarkable is, like you said, Alan, like going down and then coming back. And then it would be so easy late in a game. It's rainy. You're on the road. Your captain went down with an apparent injury. There's a bunch of guys missing, to just say, well, we got a point. Like we salvaged a point out of this. We feel good about a road point considering these conditions, considering the headwinds we're facing with injuries and everything else. But then the Fire woke up, right? Like they woke up. The subs made a difference. Greg Berhalter called them solutions and not substitutions after the game. The solutions on the bench. And that's what they were for the Fire. And it was great to see. One thing that I think that maybe we talked a lot about what the things that were good on the offense. And if we talked about how good Guti's game was, but he also got another yellow card. I didn't see contact on it. It was on a defensive action, which, by the way, we did not see from Brian Gutierrez in previous seasons. I do not I don't have a list of every defensive action that Brian Gutierrez had in the Fire's defending third. But if I did, it would not be a long list. And he's been getting back and doing the work, but a dangerous 2-footed tackle that I don't think landed on Peter Musa, but I think if it had, it would have been one of those, the second time, lucky to be a yellow if it was called as a yellow.
Yeah, I think kind of two things, Tim. One, to your point of seeing his defensive work rate improve so rapidly, I think speaks testaments who he has around him now, right? I think having a guy like Kellen Acosta on the team, it makes a huge impact. Having a guy like Jonathan Bamba, who's been a league champion in France, right? And has played at the highest levels of Europe. He plays really aggressively on defense, right? Say what you will about his game. He certainly is not slacking on that side of the ball. And then, I think also there is an aspect to this of Greg Berhalter, the men's national team coach, comes in, former men's national team, and says, hey, man, here's why you never got a call up, because you don't do A, B, and C. And I don't know that conversation happened, but in my head, that would make sense.
And one more beat on that. We talked to Andrew Gutman about, I asked him about basically Sergio Orahel and Brian Gutierrez, the two, players in the starting 11 that were Fire homegrowns, because Gutman also came up through the academy. And, he said something that I think is you normally don't get this level of honesty from players, but he said, I think even from last year to this year, Guti is a completely different player. Who says that out loud? I think it says something, and I think we're seeing more and more from Guti. And it's a different attitude. It's the way that he carries himself. It's every aspect of his game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Tim, kind of to your point there of what he did, poorly, right? There's always the note of the referee will tell you it's not about outcome, it's about intent. Certainly bad intent, same way throwing an elbow into a guy's head is bad intent. Wouldn't be shocked if we saw some kind of disciplinary action from the league, even if it was just a fine or something like that. But what kind of
the other thing is he's a guy with a reputation now, right? And that's the thing he's got to worry about. Because you will get cards that another player doing the same thing wouldn't get if you have the reputation as the kind of player that gets those cards. And that's not a player that you don't want your starting number 10 to have a reputation for getting, almost senseless cards in key situations, right? Because you don't want him to get miss a game because of yellow card accumulation, let alone a game for like a straight red or a second yellow in a match.
Yeah, and guys, I'll kind of this is something I've thought, and I wrote it down, and like I kind of like to hear if anybody else has noticed this. This team seems to have an edge. There seems to
Yes.
be an awful lot of physicality. Yeah, I mean, DJ, if you've seen it, yeah, take it away, man. If you have some thoughts.
I mean, you just need to look up Guti. There have been multiple times throughout the first 3 games where someone just made a sliding tackle that wouldn't have been made like a year ago, unless it was Amsberg. And it's just something weird about the defense where Berhalter has told them, like, you gotta be physical with these guys. You gotta, if you get a foul, you get a foul. Try to avoid the foul, but definitely seems like the team is not avoiding fouls like they used to. And I get a feeling that last year's record of being the only full season where the Fire got 1 red card during the season is probably not sticking up this year.
Well, there would be, I mean, it would mean no more red cards, right? Technically speaking, even though it wasn't given in the match. So that would be amazing if it happened, but they're playing with an edge. And I think that, I asked Berhalter about this with Guti specifically, but he said, look, young players and all players play with emotion. And it just is about like controlling that emotion and getting them to channel it and understand the right ways to apply it and stuff. So that's, and I think there's going to be a challenge for Berhalter. I think it's a challenge that we've seen Berhalter show that he can do in the past. He's been good about getting young players to play smarter. And I think that this is going to be a part of that. But on the whole, like, will I take pissed off, angry, occasionally makes stupid play, like, the defensive tackle, Brian Gutierrez, that's also scoring goals and active in the attack, over a Guti that will, chip in, something between 5 and 10 goals and never necessarily, but you don't count on him to be a difference maker when you're down by a goal, when the game's level and you need a goal, like whatever. I would take the Guti that is a difference maker every single time, even if there's downside to that. But I still think you have to work to minimize that downside.
Take the risks, honestly. Not only, like you mentioned in the edge, it's different than like edge and like making a pointless challenge and being sent off rather than, taking the risk to actually, try to change up the score. It's a change of mentality. So I'd prefer the risk, even though it might lead to a little bit more frustration, maybe an extra card or two, in terms of yellow, hopefully not red. Knock on wood, just in case. But same thing in attack. Just constantly take the risk. Because at this point, I feel like trying to playing it safe or keeping to the same like plan A option all the time doesn't seem to work out and can get a bit frustrating. It can get a bit frustrating.
So, do we think there's a possibility that Fabian Herbers, when he was cleaning out his locker, left a book that he had like tucked away in something that said like a midfielder's guide to getting stupid yellows, and Guti was like walking past and he's like, "Hey, what's this?" And that was on his off-season reading list.
I think it's a bigger chance that this is a team led by Kellen Acosta, right? Like undisputed, he is the leader of the team. I mean, I'm not in the locker room, I can't say that for sure, but he's the captain. He was the de facto captain before he was named that. And I like last week with DC in town, we're watching a corner in the in the supporters end, and somebody says, why is Acosta marking Benteke? That doesn't make any sense. And then you see Benteke start to throw his arms and get all upset and push Acosta before the ball's in the air, and then he gets called for a foul in the corner. That's why he's marking him, because he's the only guy who can get him to do that,
Yep.
And Guti needs to maybe hone it in a little.
Right, exactly. And it's about like channeling that in the right way, right? Like Acosta's always really good about doing the right kind of trash talking that like will get you in another guy's head, but where the ref doesn't have to come over and talk to you about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like coming up with ways of being smart, and knowing when to really turn it on. Like knowing when it's time to go for it, as opposed to like, I think that the frustrating thing from Guti is like both of the yellows happen and you're like, that didn't need to be the choice that you made there, right? Like this wasn't a like heat of the moment, absolute like passion, like something big was going to happen in this moment, one way or the other. It's like, you could have dealt with that better, buddy.
Comes from being 20 years old, 21. I don't even know how 21. Old he is.
I believe he's 21, turning 22 this year.
That's okay. That's what I thought. Beautiful. As we're kind of wrapping up our Dallas discussion, fellas, would love to hear kind of your one big takeaway, right? If you had one thing in your head that stuck out as full-time hit, or maybe 15 minutes later after you stopped tweeting about how awesome it was. Alan, we'll kick with you and then kind of move around the horn.
I believe it was Miss Frizzle from the Magic School Bus who said, "Take chances, make mistakes, get messy." Messy spelled with a Y, not with an I. And
we'll change it for the game against Miami when somebody.
Yeah, you know what? We'll make it a t-shirt. But yeah, they just, like I said, they kept taking chances. A few little oopsies were made, whether it was like the handball or the mistake that ended up leading to the first goal. They kept pushing forward, and in the messy situation that was a rainy day in Dallas, they made something incredible out of it. And of course, the most important thing, the Brimstone Cup is staying in Chicago. Like, just seeing the pictures of the supporters celebrating with the players lifting the trophy, it really made my day. Truly, honestly, I slept with a smile on my face.
Impressive muscle strength in your mouth, Alan. You'll have to tell me what your like mouth workout routine is. No, I mean, I agree. It was a gutsy win, right? Like, I mean, a team missing this many players, bad conditions on the pitch, going down a goal, but never really looking bowed is like, that's the kind of team that will make noise in the league. And it wasn't perfect. Like I said, like one shot in the first half, like you need more than that. But it didn't have to be perfect to get a win. And I think that's the case a lot in MLS. It's just not something that, people that watch the Fire all the time have personally had a lot of experience with. But I think that if this is the level that we're seeing and we're continuing to see improvement, because I think we've also seen game on game improvement, like this team, I think, looks like they're a lot closer to the ceiling of where we thought the team could be at the end of the year than they are the floor. And I think that it's maybe at a point where like maybe that ceiling is like getting raised a little bit.
I think it's safe to say that, definitely adding on, the Fire are no longer a team that they go down a goal, that's it, game's over, no point in bothering you just turn the TV off now, which is good. It is definitely very clear. There's more people invested in the team. You can tell, like, a lot of the players are invested in Greg. Greg is invested in a lot of the players, even down to players that are not with the team fully, even guys who know they're not going to be playing like 20, 30 games this season. Like, I will say I am biased, but I thought Pineda did decently well, all things considered.
I mean, the man can't walk. Like, I'm not trying to exaggerate that. Like, the man could barely walk, and he plays an hour of top level professional soccer
in the rain down in Dallas, which is notoriously not a great place for the Fire for the last decade. But even then, the Fire never looked like they were going to give up. They never looked like they were just going to, oh, Costa's gone. Well, we're done. We can't do anything. There was never that point where I sat back and said, okay, it's over. Instead, it was...
That's kind of crazy, though, right? Because, like,
yeah,
the captain goes down, and, like, we saw that happen with Rafa Chihos a couple of times when he was captain the past few seasons. And you were nervous about it while you're, like, it was, he was getting worked on, and, like, there was a stoppage in play as all that was going on. And then you saw it on the pitch, and it just felt like, yep, my hunch was right. And it didn't, Acosta's a loss. Like, I'm not trying to minimize that, but, like, it didn't feel like the team was playing at a lower level in any real consistent way after Acosta went down. And then we saw in the second half that they reached a level that they hadn't shown before in the match.
One thing I also feel like needs to be added, it feels like there's a group of leaders on the team now. Because I remember even watching at halftime, the players get together, the captain's supposed to give this motivating speech. He's like, the Raw. You had Kuipers and you even saw Brady both giving these talking to the guys like, okay, this is what we got to do. It's no longer just the Fire have guys who can kind of lead, but there's no real directing force. It's now you have the guys that are the leaders. They're the ones leading the squad. If one
And I
of
think
them
there's a
goes down,
vision,
two
like
more
that
people
comes
come
with
up.
a vision
Yeah.
of like, we know who we are, we know how we want to play. And that makes guys feel empowered to be comfortable coming forward and saying, all right, guys, like let's do that. Like let's stick to this plan. And if we do it and we like take care of each other, then we can get a result here.
Guys, coach is
Yeah.
right. If we, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, guys,
Listen.
coach is right. If we just no,
Coach is right. If we just throw a bunch of smoke bombs on the field, we'll win every game.
if we just hoof the ball down every time. No,
hey man, like it was like old school England football conditions at that pitch with how soggy it was getting at the end. It's just like route one, hoof it forward, mate, like kick some center back in the shins multiple times and eventually hack it in.
Yeah, Tim, I think to your point before, like there is an aspect of this too, right? Where the biggest signing on the team, the guy making the most money, the biggest name is no longer, I'll say aloof. How about that? Like he cares, right? Like Hugo Kuipers is the big spend on this team. Jonathan Bamba is the next big spend. Kellen Acosta is maybe the big domestic name. They all care. They all want to be here. They all want to win. This isn't just, I'm getting the most money I can get and going home kind of situation, right? You saw Jonathan Bamba getting beaten last night. And he gave it his all for 90 minutes. And that kind of segues me into my big takeaway was this felt like a Greg win. Like we can say a lot about how well the players played, and they did play incredibly well. You saw after those subs came on, a ton of movement in that forward line that we did not see in the first 80 minutes of the game. We saw Kuipers moving to the wing. We saw Jonathan Bamba dropping all the way back to the back line. He's playing passes in from an incredibly deep position. I don't think that's nothing. Maybe
yeah,
I'm
for
wrong.
sure. And
Maybe
like,
and
Kuipers is playing a winger after that because Bomba's been dropping back. It's like players that are just rotating where they are on the squad, almost like not really entirely total football style, but players connecting with each other in different ways, which can both unsettle defenses and also just shows the commitment that guys have.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just I think a credit to him and what he's been able to install 3 games into a season. Yeah, and that's what I would say. Obviously, a ton of credit to the guys as well, but that really stood out to me kind of watching the end of that game. We'll do a little quick hit, just talk about what we kind of have coming up this coming weekend in Toronto. Always a tough place to play, always somewhere that has a strong base, regardless of how the team is doing. They do seem to be a little on the up and down. This is also kind of to build into that, the first time an American team will go to Canada in MLS this season. Yeah, so first time an MLS team goes to Canada this season, possibly just adding a little bit of fuel to that fire. I don't know if anybody wants to kind of kick us off. Otherwise, I'll toss to Tim there if you have thoughts on what that entrance might look like for those guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be. I lived in Canada. I am familiar with the way that the national anthems can go there. Both ways. Like I was also living there right after 9/11 when it was a very different reaction than I think we're about to get on Saturday. Despite the fact that a lot of the guys on both rosters obviously are not Canadian or American passport holders or natives. But that will just, I think, add to the intensity of the atmosphere. I think it will make it a more difficult place to play, especially for some of the younger guys that have not encountered it as much necessarily. Like, Sergio Orahel has played in the U.S. youth national team setup in tournaments in Central and South America, but like the crowd you get even in Central America for youth soccer is just not the same kind of stuff you get when like Kellen Acosta was doing World Cup qualifying for the USMNT. So that adds another wrinkle. But I think that may actually kind of be the best thing that Robin Fraser, Toronto's new head coach, has going for him this year. The group is still winless. That they do have a draw in there, so like give them credit for that. But 2 losses alongside it, which is more or less like what the Fire would have been if they didn't get a win in Dallas, and I recognize that. But Toronto has not looked good past that. Like the Fire, I think, looked in it for at least good segments of every game, including the tough one against Columbus, which is a loss. Toronto have just like, it's nothing. And it's like, it's at the point where like Lorenzo Insigne is not even really a coming off the bench for them very much. Bernadeschi is, the name that they have, but he's not really, like, he can't take it all himself, right?
He's either really, really good or really, really bad.
Yeah, and they also, like, this offseason, they added a new striker who's unfortunately one of the names that I'm going to try saying Brynhildsen, but I don't know if I'm doing that anything close to right, so I'm sorry about that. But, in prime striker from Norway, but not, I believe, a DP level striker. And other than that, not a ton of big names for a team that I think a lot of us were surprised did as well as they did, but had as a spoon contender last year, and they're very much looking like a spoon contender this year. Oh, and they got Sean Johnson, though, so yay, Milkman. We'll just give him those props just out of the gate.
Yay,
sorry,
Milkman.
DJ, I know that was going to be your thing, but I didn't want you to do it before.
What? You robbed me with a chance to talk about 2013 again. God dang it, Tim. Okay, I know where you live. I will send you 3 crickets from PetSmart.
I know. Is that a threat? Is that the start of is that like the world's smallest plague? Like a mini Bible plague, the kind of thing? Like,
I will send you 1 bottle of red Gatorade followed by
red
1 frog.
The traditional Florida drink.
Thus says the DJ.
Yeah.
Anyway,
and like 5 grains of Florida sand alongside 3 crickets.
The only thing, the thing I'll say about this game is, another game on the bounce, but on the bounce being on away. But I think they can easily take this confidence from Dallas to up north and basically replicate what they did. I think if I were to do a score prediction, I would say 2-1. I think backline is still going to take a bit more time to gel. We'll see what happens, especially with injuries. Again, knock on wood. We don't need another player to be subbed off fairly early because of injury or at all because of injury. But I think this could be another 3 points.
Agreed. But you're right. Like, the depth is going to be a major issue.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't heard anything, but Kwame hasn't been in training, and just based on Berhalter saying 9.5 out of 10, you don't say that if you feel there's a 90% chance that Kwame is going to be ready to go the next week. So, it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. If the Fire 2 depth chart is probed even like a little bit deeper than that, but it's like, who would that go? I mean, I guess you could give like Harold Osorio another shot, or Chase Nagel, I like that. He's just not, like, Chase Nagel's not ready for MLS at this point. Like, that's just the reality of it. So, I don't know.
I think you might disagree from a roster construction standpoint. I'll be honest. Like, I don't see how Sam Williams doesn't get a first team contract this week.
The Fire don't really have they have space, but only not on the supplemental roster, which impacts things a little bit differently. That may be a possibility, right? But then you're stuck with it for however long, and it's difficult, Yeah,
I mean, if Tim, correct me if I'm wrong. We have three roster spots open, but the supplemental roster is full. Correct.
And that's I believe you can continue to sort of massage how that works for cap reasons, which the Fire did this year by putting Chase Gasper on the senior roster from the supplemental. Who knows? I mean, that's a possibility.
Can I ask you a quick question? This is something I've been thinking about since last night. Does David Pareva have a season-ending injury designation as of now? Because he tore his ACL. That should be season-ending injury, right?
Not officially, right? And I think that there's some reasons you do that. One of which is the supplemental. When you get 1 season-ending injury designation per year, and when you give someone that designation, they can't play for the rest of the year, even if they're ready at the tail end, which is one factor. But I think the bigger factor here is that by putting a player on that list, you get both salary, like roster relief. So you open up that slot on the roster, whatever slots that person occupies. So if it's a DP, you can bring in a DP, as well as whatever cap hit that player occupies. So you free up that cap space. And because he's on the supplemental roster, that doesn't affect the cap directly. So it would be a minimal cap improvement for the Fire. It's unfortunate. Like, it would be devastating if Kellen Acosta was found to have something that would be considered a season-ending injury, just 3 games into the season. But if that was the case, then that would open up TAM level money for the Fire. Now, like I said, like there's not a lot of good, like if a performing TAM level player, with maybe one exception we could talk about, is like actually performing to their contract, you're not going to just be able to trade for them now, right? Because they're making a contribution for their team.
And and then this we'll stop talking about roster details, but looking at kind of the breakdown, a guy like Sergio Orhel, a guy like him, right? Just as an example, moving him from supplemental to senior, how does that kind of impact where we're at with what the cap currently allows?
So since he's gotten a first team, we know what he makes on the first team deal, and it's not a lot. The other factor is there's players on the supplemental roster, homegrowns. You can give them a signing bonus using GAM, but that doesn't affect the roster either. So if Orahel was moved, he's, as of last year, and I don't believe that his contract changed, was on the senior minimum. So we're at like a $90,000 cap hit, basically. Which is not on the Fire's roster because he's on the supplemental. And so that would, I think, potentially be an option. But again, like, there's still lots of pieces that have to move around. And back to the Toronto match for just a second. It's kind of funny because it's, despite being literally across the continent, kind of like almost halfway north-south, going northeast from Dallas, the weather, Toronto, it's going to be Saturday afternoon because of when the kickoff is, but it looks like it's going to be raining in almost exactly the same temperature as it was in Frisco, Texas. So, maybe it is like Alan kind of said, like it's going to be a case of it being the same kind of a performance again and like the same kind of conditions without tarped over seats. But other than that.
Yep. And kind of keep it on that. We'll get back to the topic at hand and not whatever I'm
well, just the other thing, I didn't say the name. I think Julian Gressel is a name that a lot of people have asked about. He's not currently playing in Toronto. Looks like he's working his way out. I think everyone's waiting to see if Toronto will put him on
Miami.
Put him on waivers, which would enable teams to basically bid for part of it, or just give him a buyout, which would enable him to go wherever he wanted. And then a team could pick him up for an offer, and like Miami would be on the hook for whatever amount of money that the team that picked them up didn't pay. But I mean, I imagine there'd be a bidding war for a player of Julian Gressel's caliber because there's more than one team that can use a guy like him, including the Fire.
Yeah, that's a situation of you cross your fingers he wants to be here.
And reportedly, he wants to stay on the East Coast. He has a wife and kids. They still own a house in DC. It's difficult to move someone, especially when your spouse has a career and stuff of her own. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Back to the task at hand. DJ, thoughts on the Toronto game? What do you think is going to make them break?
This is a game the Fire should win more than they should have won the game last year. So, full record, before the season began, we were talking about what two of the worst teams in the East would be. Toronto and DC were the two that we said, these are going to be the worst teams in the East. Like, everyone you look around says DC and Toronto. DC is playing better than we thought they would. Of course, it's only 3 games in, but Toronto is playing about where we expected them to be. And this is the type of game that the Fire struggled to win years over the last decade and a half or so. This is the game the Fire need to win. It says, as we were saying, a must win, but you're going to Toronto. Toronto is not in a good place. They're really not that good. You may be dealing with injuries, but you need to show not just you need to show the league, like, we're injured, but we're still going to be here. And if the Fire could come away, I say more than realistically, the Fire are going to walk away with a 2-0 win. If they win, I imagine Brady's still going to be great because I said this before the season, and apparently Chris Brady heard me and decided that I was going to be accurate in my statement of if Brady plays as good as I think he can, he's going to be the MVP of the season. And he has decided to just go all in on that. If he continues that form, it's going to be hard to really see the Fire. As long as the offense can get well and the defense can gel enough to keep the ball away from the back, then all of a sudden, against a team like Toronto that's not really that good, they should do well and they should win.
Just Toronto's only out of the basement of the East because they got a point in DC, the other team that we were talking about. Now, obviously, that's the same result the Fire got, so it's not like they can just gloat. And it's not like Toronto. It's still a team that has Bernadeschi. It's still a team that has some good players in it. Jonathan Osorio, I think, can really be a difference maker, even in his mid-30s or early to mid-30s. I don't know, 32, I think he is. But it's a game that the Fire should have confidence that they should go in and win. Now, the question is, that has not translated into wins for the Fire in recent years. This team feels like it's different, and this will be a good chance for the team to prove it. I was going to say 2-0 as well. Like I feel like a clean sheet against Toronto is achievable, and it's still not going to be super easy. But and I think that would help cement Toronto as being the spoon contender, or at least the bottom of the East contender. I mean, Montreal are currently behind them, but they played, I want to say, Atlanta, Minnesota, and then they just played Vancouver. Vancouver's a better team than we thought this year. Minnesota looks really good. Atlanta, spent ungodly sums of money on upgrading in the offseason. And Toronto was like, no, we got this striker from Northern Europe and that'll be that. So, it's Montreal's had a harder schedule. Toronto has had a, not super hard schedule, all things considered. I mean, Cincinnati's a good team, but DC is a game that, if you can't beat DC, it's like get a result. Like, what are you doing? And that's where the Fire were. And they did the same thing the Fire did. So again, we're not talking about the Fire just being able to walk all over them, but it just feels like the Fire have to feel like the stronger team.
Yeah, I think coming into this kind of road stretch, I realistically saw 4 points. I said, I think just based on the depth right now, Dallas is going to be really tough to get a result in. We saw how that turned out. I think Vancouver away is going to be really difficult, especially early in this season at the end of a road trip. Granted, we've been in Central Time I guess Toronto will be Eastern Time. But neither here nor there, right? Actually, that actually makes my point a little better. Never mind. Bouncing around kind of in the time zones, right?
Afternoon game in Toronto as well. So different time of day, different situation, different vibes.
Yeah.
Amen.
And I just think there was going to be a little bit of, if you can go to Vancouver and get a point, that's going to feel really good. Toronto feels like the game you win. And I think it's going to depend a little bit on what the roster looks like. Obviously, wasn't expecting to not have Kellen Acosta. But if you swap out Acosta for Zinkernagel coming back and maybe Marin Haile Selassie being available off the bench, we'll see how realistic that is. And maybe 70 minutes, 60 minutes out of Leo Barroso. I think we're going to find out this team can score in bunches.
And I think that you're right. 4 points is the number you circled. That should have been the goal going in. And if you do that, you're doing okay. But I think now you have to be hungry for more. And again, previous Fire teams have aimed for the middle and typically missed low. And I think that the question is, can this team prove that they are actually hungry for more than that?
Amen.
I think they walk into Saturday afternoon knowing they're the better team on the field. And I think that plays out very quickly. I'll say that.
And to DJ's prediction of a clean sheet, which is also, I thought 2-0 as well. But talking to Brady about it, he likes playing in the afternoon because he's otherwise I'm just what am I doing all day? I'm just thinking about the game and not actually doing anything for it. I like getting it over with. So if you're looking for another reason to pick Brady to go into absolute beast mode, there you go.
Yeah, I do think there's a pretty. I would hammer the both teams to score in this just because I think Toronto will find one. I could see it being 3-1, 4-1 kind of situation, depending on who's available in the attack, especially if Orhel and maybe a guy like Osorio has to come up instead of an actual reinforcement. Not to say he's not a reinforcement. That's not my intention, but bringing somebody new in, I should say. I wouldn't be shocked if Toronto found the net once. Anybody else want to chip in on Toronto before we kind of wrap things up? We feeling good?
Like we should.
Wonderful. No? Okay. All right. Cool. Austin cut that part out where I just went a bunch of times. Awesome.
Well, leave it in,
Austin. Leave this. Austin, leave this in and just start playing the Jeopardy.
This podcast is super long, but we had a few news things to talk about, and now we have the glory of that.
Wonderful. Well, we'll kind of wrap it up from here. Tim, Alan, DJ, thank you so much for joining. And to everybody listening in, thank you so much for joining us around the bonfire. It's been a pleasure to talk about Chicago Fire and our winning ways that will hopefully continue into the future. Again, this is John filling in for Matt. Thanks so much for tuning in, and come on, you men in red.
Come on, you men in red.